Hello and welcome. We're trying something a little different today. Discover a new, in-depth approach to book coverage with this extended summary.
That's right. Unlike our previous review, which offers a more focused analysis, this feature is designed to deliver a really comprehensive overview.
We'll be tracing the intellectual roots, the key arguments, and the real-world impact of this subject.
And we'd love to know what you think. If you appreciate this expanded format and find it helpful, please let us know. Your feedback will definitely help shape our future content.
So let's start with a question for you. What if the ultimate lesson from the darkest period of 20th century history wasn't about tanks and treaties, not about the major political shifts, but instead about the small daily choices you make right now?
Things like what you say, what you choose to believe, and maybe even whether you decide to show up to a local meeting.
That is the challenge posed by the compact, yet incredibly powerful book we are diving into today.
We are undertaking a comprehensive deep dive into On Tyranny, 20 Lessons from the 20th Century by the historian Timothy Snyder.
It was published in 2017, and it felt incredibly timely then.
It was meant to. The book is a deliberate, concise warning, almost a pocket guide written in direct response to global concerns over democratic backsliding. Snyder specializes in Central and Eastern Europe, in the collapse of democracy, and he uses that historical precedent not just to warn, but to instruct.
And before we get started, we want to let you know that you are experiencing a unique two-host AI conversation powered by Google's Notebook LM for deeper, more dynamic book summaries.
So let's start with the author's mission here. Snyder makes the case that history, well, it doesn't repeat itself, but it certainly teaches.
It gives us patterns to watch for.
Exactly. He takes the specific failures of interwar Europe and the mid-20th century tyrannies, both fascist and communist, and he distills them down into 20 very actionable lessons.
They're almost like civic survival strategies.
That's a great way to put it. They're aimed at safeguarding democracy today.
Okay, let's unpack the historical canvas he's painting. I think it's critical to understand the fragility he's referencing.
Absolutely. He focuses particularly on the collapse of liberal institutions in Germany, in Italy, the rise of the Soviet Union, and then the occupied territories from, say, the 1920s all the way through the 1940s.
And these weren't stable environments. They were places rife with economic despair after World War I, which of course fed into political extremism.
And what's fascinating is the specific point of failure he really hammers home, the Weimar Republic.
Right.
For Snyder, the collapse of Weimar's fragile institutions isn't just a German problem. He sees it as the central cautionary tale for modern democracies.
Because it shows how quickly a liberal center can just evaporate.
Yes, how it can be completely overwhelmed when it fails to hold firm against massive economic upheaval and political extremism from both the far left and the far right.
And the book brings this to life by using historical figures as well as lessons, not as fictional characters.
Right. You see Adolf Hitler, for instance, establishing control through bureaucracy and spectacle, or you see Joseph Stalin illustrating the tactics of secret police and the creation of these fabricated enemies.
And there are these chilling details, like his direct orders expanding the gulags.
But the real weight of the book, I think, rests on the archetypes of ordinary citizens. That's where the lessons really hit home.
You mean people like the Weimar voters swayed by promises of stability?
Exactly. Or the professionals who chose complicity over principle. And conversely, you also see the Polish resistors who organized in small local cells. The lessons are drawn from the mundane choices these people made that either accelerated or resisted that slide into totalitarianism.
So let's look at the first thematic block here, the battle for perception and reality. Snyder starts right away with communication, which is lesson number 1.
And this raises a really important question. How does tyranny begin to control us before it even touches us physically?
Through words.
Through words. Lesson number 1 urges us to pay close attention to political language. Snyder highlights how the Nazis took a seemingly positive, unifying term, national community, and used it to conceal brutal, exclusionary, and totalitarian aims.
It's a way of redefining reality without anyone noticing the laws have changed yet.
Precisely. It shows us that subtle shifts in how words are used can entirely redefine citizenship and rights.
Okay, so if language is the first thing to be compromised, then truth itself must be the next line of defense.
Which brings us to lesson number 4. It's a simple but profound instruction. Believe in truth.
He isn't just asking you to believe facts, though. It's something deeper, isn't it?
Much deeper. He is urging you to uphold the social contract that allows a shared, objective reality to even exist in the first place.
Right. Because when the state systematically fabricates and distributes disinformation,
Hmm.
what he calls the big lie.
Which is what the Soviet regime did. It's not just about fooling people. It's about making citizens doubt their own senses, their own memory.
And that power of the lie is just amplified by modern technology.
It is. He connects his historical examples, like in lesson number 6 on radio propaganda, directly to the pervasive media dynamics we all face today.
And this brings us to the active response required from us, from citizens. Lesson number 11 focuses on investigating.
Yes, and he draws from the essential, incredibly dangerous work of underground journalists in Nazi-occupied areas
People who are risking their lives just to verify information.
to verify a single fact, to report what was actually happening. In that context, truth-seeking and verification aren't academic exercises. They're necessary acts of resistance. It demands a commitment to an independent reality.
So if lesson number 1 shows how language is compromised, what's the next step?
The next step is knowing where to plant our feet. That's lesson number 2. Defend institutions. It's an immediate pivot from perception to physical action.
And he's very clear that institutions, courts, schools, media, local government, they're not abstract ideas.
No, not at all. He insists they are habits of civic practice that must be actively maintained through participation. You have to show up.
And this is where he uses the collapse of Weimar so effectively.
He does. The 1933 Reichstag fire is his prime example of a crisis being exploited by the Nazis to suspend rights.
To essentially abandon the Constitution for what they called security.
Exactly. So lesson number 2 is about preventing that moment of abandonment. It's about prioritizing the constitutional framework before the crisis fully hits. It shows just how quickly fragile democracies can fall when basic protections are giving up in a panic.
And this framework includes not just the courts, but the political structure itself.
Yes, which leads to lesson number 3, which warns against the dangers of a one-party state.
Something he saw happen across Eastern Europe.
Right. He draws on the communist takeovers to illustrate how seemingly legal incremental steps, like forcing out opposition leaders or merging parties, can dismantle a democracy from within without a violent coup.
You just wake up one morning and the opposition is gone.
It's gone. The structure is hollowed out.
This also demands a reflection on personal power, which brings us to a complex point. Lesson number 7, which is about weapons.
That's an interesting one. The lesson tells the reader to be reflective if you must be armed.
It's an unusual inclusion, but he connects it to historical examples of private militias or heavily armed groups that often pave the way for the very tyranny they claim to be resisting.
Because they operated outside of institutional control, it's a nuanced warning. The presence of arms, when unmoored from legitimate frameworks like a police force or a national guard, can actually increase political instability and invite state overreach rather than deterring it.
He saw this in the interwar period, with paramilitary groups acting as shock troops for authoritarian parties.
Exactly.
For those of you who seek this kind of analysis and insight, we want to mention Mindful Moments. That's our YouTube channel offering AI book analysis, summaries and critiques, inspiring reflection and rational thought.
Now, if we connect this to the bigger picture, we can move from the public sphere, from institutions, to the sanctity of private life.
This is lesson number 12. Maintain a private life.
And this is illustrated by the terrifying Soviet show trials in the 1930s, where high-ranking officials were suddenly executed after fabricated accusations and coerced confessions.
That lesson is profoundly chilling. The idea that when the state monitors and records every aspect of your life,
And Snyder is very specific. He cites Soviet file-keeping on ordinary citizens.
they gain the power to destroy you instantly. They can just fabricate a crime from your past or present.
So maintaining a sphere of private life and understanding surveillance techniques becomes a vital defense mechanism against the state's ability to just arbitrarily punish you.
And that leads directly to the question of societal pressure.
Yes. Lesson number 13. It discusses everyday nationalism and conformity, which he illustrates with the prevalence of uniform wearing in fascist youth groups.
It's not just about the grand political violence.
No, it's about the small, constant societal shifts that normalize authoritarianism. Wearing the party badge, participating in required parades. These are the small steps that test your allegiance and integrate you into the official ideology.
It's about recognizing those incremental steps toward complicity. And this connects to lesson number 19, which demands you be a patriot.
But Snyder defines patriotism very carefully here.
He does. He argues that true patriotism isn't blind allegiance to a current regime or its leader. It's principled opposition when the state betrays the nation's founding ideals.
And he offers these archetypes of professionals who refuse to attend required rallies or who wouldn't join the mass organizations. They chose local engagement and principle over self-preservation or their careers.
These choices are acts of conscience.
They are, which is what lesson number 18 advises. Keep calm when the unthinkable arrives. This is a profoundly psychological lesson.
Drawn from the shock of an invasion or a catastrophic political change.
Yes, the individuals who survived and who resisted were often those who maintained their composure and stuck to their professional ethics rather than immediately panicking or fleeing.
The narrative then advances to the really desperate choices, made when institutions have fully collapsed.
This is lesson number 14. Action in extremity. He draws on the partisan actions in the forests in the 1940s, fighting against occupiers.
It's a powerful argument that resistance is always possible, even in the most dire circumstances.
It is. It emphasizes that there is always a choice, even when your options are severely limited. Whether it's passing around propaganda pamphlets or refusing to say a loyalty oath, these small acts prevent total ideological capture.
So, after all of this, what is the biggest takeaway for you, the learner?
Well, I think Snyder's book really is a summary focused on three interwoven concepts: truth, institutions, and personal responsibility.
It's not just a historical warning about fascism or communism.
No, it's much more than that. It's an instruction manual for civil society based on avoiding the specific, documented, tactical mistakes of the 20th century.
The book concludes by reflecting on the psychological survival that comes after a great catastrophe.
It does. Lesson number 20. Be as courageous as you can. Finds meaning through professional integrity and simple, honest work after World War II.
And the author's tone throughout is so direct, so urgent. He's emphasizing that these lessons are timeless and require continuous application. They aren't just resolved historical accounts to be studied.
No, they're active principles. You know, Snyder published this in 2017, and its urgency just immediately resonated. The real impact, I think, lies in its ability to take these terrifying historical details, like the arbitrary nature of the Soviet show trials or the psychological manipulation in Nazi media, and translate them into actionable, specific steps for you today.
Which leaves a final question for you.
If authoritarianism thrives by eroding your sense of reality and fracturing civil society, which of the 20 lessons resonates most immediately with your daily defense of objective truth?
We hope this extended summary gave you the in-depth overview you needed. Click the link on screen for the in-depth book critique. Subscribe, share, purchase via the link, and as always, think rationally.
See the many genre-based book podcasts at Mindful Moments. Subscribe and nourish your mind on the go.